All right, in this section, we're going to take a look at stone and cliffs and rocks and that kind of thing. This is actually my source texture. And what I want to show is I already, just to kind of speed things up a little bit, because you've already seen the Crazy Bump section, I did go in and dial each individual section of this in Crazy Bump. And I'm going to go ahead and get my shader connected. And because we've kind of already gone over that, I'm just going to have it played back kind of fast here. So what you're watching during this sped up render is basically the file textures getting brought in to the node editor and just going and getting the shader all connected and hooked up. And, you know, this is definitely something that a lot of studios will have a bit automated, so you can just kind of bring everything in at once. But when I'm at home, I just bring them in one by one. And then it's really about playing with the tiling and making sure the shader is looking good in the other light settings. You can see right here, just kind of playing around with it, getting it to a good spot, and now I can continue. Cool, so this is a good place to just kind of get started. So this isn't feeling too great yet. It's definitely stuff I want to do. Want to desaturate the color a little bit. I might update that as we go. But one of the big things that's really going to sell this as rock and cliff, that kind of thing, is really going to be displacement. And I wanted to show you that you can still use displacement maps the same way that we've been setting up all these shaders, and you can actually have a little bit of procedural type control using these tileable textures. So I've got in Photoshop loaded up here. So this is my diffuse texture, and this is actually the displacement map that Crazy Bump kicked out, which is pretty cool. And what I want to do is, you can see Crazy Bump honestly has some sort of flaws in it, and I couldn't get this black area out, and there's definitely some areas that are clipped. There's a little bit of clipping in the whites, a little bit of clipping in the black. So I'm just going to paste this in here, and I'm just going to desaturate this, and I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to get my mode here to 16 bits instead of simply 8. And I'm going to set this to overlay. And already you can see I'm starting to introduce some detail back into there. So I'm going to start over a little bit. I'm going to kind of build my displacement from the ground up. And you know, notice how I'm just doing this in Photoshop. I'm not going into ZBrush, I'm not sculpting anything. I'm just straight up Photoshopping a simple displacement map for myself. So starting off with a base layer at 50% gray, I'm going to layer this in, so I'm going to set this to overlay. And that's going to basically look exactly the same as it did, but maybe I can turn that down a tiny bit, especially so those areas that are clipped are not so clipped out. And then we've got this, you know, the main just desaturated image going over top of it. But I can go in here and I can actually throw a high pass filter on this. And I can start pulling out these different layers of detail that I want to have running through my displacement map. I can also pull the radius pretty high if I want to, and you can see, you know, in areas like this, I'm starting to get a really cool effect where you can almost feel some of the lighter areas that are going to lift out, but there's still going to be that really nice texture running across the surface. The normal map I kicked out has a lot less of the high frequency detail and more of the low frequency detail. So if I need that, I can go in and layer that over top as well. So this is pretty cool. I may need to go in and just lift some of these really dark areas because those may punch in a little too much. But you can see there's this nice edge running here. There's some lighter areas. Overall, it's feeling pretty cool. And now I can, of course, dial that down a little bit as I need to. And you can see how I'm just able to bring a little bit of that detail back in. So that these areas always are maintaining some sort of fidelity down in there. I don't want it to go to solid black, and I don't want it to go to solid white, and I'm able to maintain that. So I'm going to save this out now as a 16-bit TIFF and displacement, and I'm just going to call this displace version 2. Save that out. And now I can start playing around with this in the displacement. So I'm going to go in here. I'm going to go to Create, V-Ray, V-Ray Displacement, Apply Single V-Ray Displacement Node to Selection. I'm just going to have all of these sharing of V-Ray displacement. I'm going to stop my IPR for 1 second And I'm going to go ahead and create my file texture. I'm going to load this up, displacement version 2, and I'm going to connect this placement texture from down below so they're all shared. And I'm just going to drag that file texture in. And I do want to add a little bit of V-Ray attributes to this to control it. So I'm going to add a displacement control and also a subdivision and displacement quality. So first things first, I'm going to turn off view dependent so I can control exactly how many times this is going to get subdivided. I'm going to set my edge length to 0.01. So again, this is an unachievable value as far as V-Ray is concerned. And we'll start off with, we'll try 4 subdivisions. This geo is already pretty dense, so that's going to get it, subdivided each of these 4 times. That'll be pretty dense already. And we can, just start there. Up top here, displacement amount of 1, sure. Displacement shift, negative 0.5, because I am using that 16-bit displacement that has 50% gray as my main midpoint value. I'm going to turn on keep continuity as well, so you can make sure that V-Ray does its best to connect areas of the mesh so that you don't get the tearing that happens. And we'll see how that looks. So this time I'm going to do an actual render. It's feeling pretty cool. I feel currently that the high frequency detail might be a little too much. It feels a little bubbly as well, so I can start turning down some of these settings. And so I can go in here on my V-Ray displacement, and I can say displacement amount 0.5, which means my shift is going to be negative 0.25. And we can start just, I can actually dial this in my V-Ray RT. So you can see if I IPR this now. So that's a little bit better, but I'm going to maybe kind of split the difference here, as they say. So we'll do like try 0.8 and then negative 0.4. And now what I can do, this is getting a really nice amount of detail, but I feel like I want a little bit more lumpiness in it almost. And so I could try introducing maybe something like a solid fractal. And I can even add this in. So I can say plus minus average. And I can just, I can do a layer texture. I can do plus minus average, whatever I want to do. It's totally up to me here. So I'm going to say effects, insert color remap. What I want to do on this color remap is I'm going to remap these values. So on my remap value, I can start clamping this down a little bit. And I'm really just looking right up here. I want to, just add some of this. If I'm adding this in, I want it to only be in specific areas where it's just going to push out and do something a little bit more. So you can just see what this does. I have no idea. So I actually don't even need a plus minus average. I can just actually put this directly in to the color offset right here. That will essentially add it directly back in, and I can say alpha is luminance in case there's any confusion there. Whoa, so that's going to get a little bit crazy. So maybe that's a bad idea. But we can continue to mess around with it here. So, on my remap here, because I just essentially added this value of 1, maybe I really want that to be more like 0.1. We can see what that does now. So that's a little bit better. I can also go in on my solid fractal settings now and dial this around a little bit. So maybe my ratio is a little bit less. So it's a little just softer. And now I can see what that looks like. So you can see we're starting, it's just adding those areas. So I can crank this way back up again just to see exactly what it's doing here. So it's doing a little bit of weird stuff. I'm not totally sure how I feel about it. If I clamp that down, I can just see exactly where it's doing anything. Cool. So that's now giving me a better idea of where this is actually happening inside of here. So maybe I even want to scale up my 2D texture. So see, now I can see exactly where this is happening. And now I can actually go in and adjust my remap ramp back down. And that will spread it across the surface a little bit more. And now I can really just dial this right back down. So it's really pretty subtle effect. Like I'm looking at this, I really don't want, I don't really want it to, stick out like a mesa or like a, like a spire sticking up. I just want it to roll a little bit of extra larger shapes through my object. So cool, kind of interesting. And, you can see how this can start coming together and looking pretty cool. Definitely another one of those things where the sky is kind of the limit here and you can do whatever you want with it. And if I just stop my render here, and let's go ahead and save, and I'm just actually going to render from my perspective camera so that I can tumble around here. We can see what we're looking at. Definitely pretty interesting. Pretty cool effect. And you can, if you try out all sorts of different textures using this technique, this almost feels like a coral, which is pretty cool. And if I just switch this out for totally different textures, I'll get a totally different look and feel to it. So very cool. Definitely a lot of detail that you can get in there. And, just another way to kind of experiment with these textures and get different effects than you may be used to seeing. So let's go ahead and get this looking a little bit nicer. Something, I feel like the diffuse color is throwing this off a little bit, so we can even try swapping in a different file texture here. And, I'm with this, it's really just kind of, so let's see what happens if we grab this guy here. That one's pretty nice. And we'll just go ahead and connect that into our diffuse color. So this will be a little bit weird because we're going to have a different diffuse going over our object here. So let's do that texture input gamma. And so our displacement's not going to match our actual texture, but our diffuse texture is actually a very kind of, basic rock kind of texture. And so right now, so you can definitely feel that separation, which isn't very good. So let's go ahead and build some maps out that match this texture. There we go. And I'm going to start a new shader. So we have that one for the demo intact. I'm just going to say select objects with material. And I'm going to bounce back to my master layer. And I'm going to assign our new shader here. Cool. So let's get this duplicated. I went ahead and sped up this part of the video where I'm just creating another shader. So just bring in all those textures, getting them all connected. And now let's start our IPR up again and see how this is looking. Pretty intense right now because we've still got this displacement in here. So for the time being, let's just get our temporary displacement hooked up. And I'm not sure how it's going to look, but we're going to experiment and see what happens. So I still have that solid fractal going in as well. Again, that's another thing we'll have to kind of, I guess, see how it's looking. And we'll have to go in here and let's get this bump map dialed down. I really just want to see what that displacement's, how that's affecting it. And we'll let this render in. So this is how our render turned out. It's definitely still a little too bumpy, so I want to go in and start trying to smooth out certain areas of this thing. So we can adjust our displacement over here. Let's get these grouped. And I'm going to go ahead and just see what happens if I blur this out a little bit. Because this is going to work alongside that bump map. So we can just see, maybe we'll try calling this one displacement version 2. And with displacement version 2, I do want to go ahead and I'm going to cool off on this solid fractal for right now. And let's go ahead and do a quick render and see what that's looking like. So that's feeling a lot better. And so last but not least, I'm just going to go ahead and see what this looks like on a polygon plane right next to our object here and see if it's feeling nice and see if it's feeling kind of like a cliff face. So something like that. Let's get that assigned. And I'm just going to go over to my outliner and I'm going to drag and drop this polygon plane into my V-Ray displacement. Just like that. And let's see how it's looking. So our texture is not tiling perfectly yet, but overall, it's definitely feeling kind of nice. It's got a, kind of like a smooth, kind of like a catacomb or a chiseled out wall feel to it. And if you look at that reflection pass, we get some nice specular going on. And then, same process, same part of the deal here. Since it's not really working on the tiling yet, I'm just going to go ahead and get that adjusted. So probably want to duplicate this out and get our displacements actually connected properly here. So I want to get this file texture set to be version 2, and we'll connect that in up to my V-Ray displacement. And so now I can swap that to this one here. So if you want to swap that to that other file texture, you can feel free. And so we've got our, displacement, our red wall over there, and then this stone version 2 is going to be our current cliff displacement. So I think that was part of the issue with the tiling. We had a little mixed up. So let's see, hopefully this works a little bit better this time. So as this kind of finishes up here, you can see actually that, of course, helped the displacement over here too, because it's matching a little bit better now. So that's cool, feeling pretty nice. Definitely a nice texture and feeling pretty cool. So, you can, what I want you to take away from this is that you can expand on, the way we're creating these shaders using Maya nodes all over the place. So what I want you to take away from this is that you can actually really expand on the techniques we've been doing to create these shaders. And I really recommend that you play around with this, and before you jump into a program like Substance Painter or Substance Designer or the Quixel suite, and get a feel for how you would go about making something like this yourself, because those programs are so amazingly powerful, and it'll help you to create shaders inside of that software as well. And you can start creating your own smart materials in Substance, for example, and really just think about how to build these things up. And when you start getting into these procedural programs like that, it'll just make you even more amazing of a look dev artist, and you'll be able to really utilize these tools as they evolve and grow. So really cool stuff, and we're going to build on it a little bit more.